Hello, welcome back to computer-aided drafting course using AutoCAD software week 2 lay of the land. So last week we had a look at the course preamble. We had an intro to AutoCAD, the interface, and also we had looked into a lot of basic commands such as line, circle, ellipse, arc, and so on. So this week let us look into the lay of the land. That is, we'll cover the topics such as the drafting settings that will help us to navigate and perform our designs more effectively. We'll look into each and every command. For example, we'll look into object snap techniques, snap and grid, polar tracking, and quick properties. So these are covered in the drafting settings. And next we have the dynamic inputs. This will help to input the key factors very quick. So we'll look into that too. Then we'll look into specifying the limits, the units, and then we'll look into the options that is available in AutoCAD. And also we'll look brief into using the undo and redo command. So following these topics, we'll also look into editing fundamentals such as the move command, the copy command, array command, break, mirror, and offsetting. So using all these learnings, we'll try and execute an assignment for this week. So now let's move over to the AutoCAD interface. So here we have a new drawing and let us look into the drafting settings. So the drafting settings is available in the menu bar, the classic menu bar under tools. In tools, you have the drafting settings. You can also invoke this by specifying the command D settings onto your command prompt. Let us do that. So I'm closing this one. So type in D settings and you'll get the same. So this drafting settings will help you to do the most frequent tasks or the intended drafting techniques that you want to employ. So let's start off with this tab, the basic tab, the object snapping. So in this object snap, you will use the commands to snap the next point to any one of these basic requirements. So if you hover over this object snap on toolbar, you can look into the details. So this will enable the snap command on or off. So this also can be actuated by using the function 3 shortcut. So when you enable this, you have the other options that is available to you. But if you disable it, these won't be available. That is, you are not going to snap it. So let us quickly see one example what the snapping means about. Okay, so let us turn this off and look into. So let us draw a rectangle first and then try to fit a circle into the rectangle. So now let us use the rectangle command. This is one such command. We'll look into this in the later part of this today's course, but let us quickly prompt this one, rectangle. So we just specify the first and the last endpoint, the two corner points. Now we have got the rectangle. So now this is going to be single object. Now let us try and fit a circle into this rectangle. So remember, we have turned off the snap command. So as you can see, I'm not sure where I should place my center point and what should be my radius, because this rectangle is of arbitrary dimensions. So in order to know that, I have to use this measure command to look into what is this distance. So let us use this quick. So by hovering here, we can see the width is 15.9938 and the height is 8.2647. So we have to do the calculation to figure out the midpoint of this rectangle so that I can set my center point and set the radius using the height. So this complicates things. So this is where it is beneficial for us to go into the object snap technique. So let us turn that on by pressing function F3. So you can see the command has actuated object snap on. So now let us try and repeat the same step. Let us take a circle, and you can see something pops up here. So one thing that is if you hover it here, you can understand that it is snapping to the endpoint, and when you extend it, you can see how far you are extending from that corner point and what is the angle pertaining to it. If you could recollect the relative polar coordinate system that we were talking about in the previous week, you can see it is showing a relative position 18.6696 from the point at a polar angle of 180 degree, and if you go this way it's 90, and so on. So now it's again snapping to exact rectangular polar, that is, it is snapping in the 90 degree 180 degree perspective. So but we also wanted the center point, so let's look into how it can be actuated. So let us go into the D settings. So now, as you can see, the object snap modes have been enabled as endpoint extension. This is what we were getting at. So let us look into what other object snap modes are available. So this first endpoint will snaps to the closest endpoint that is available. It might be a line, an arc, or multi-line, whatever it is. It will always look to the endpoint of it or the corner. Whereas in this extension, it will look into a relative distance from that endpoint, and it will also plot you a temporary extension line so that you need not execute a separate construction line or a drafting line for that purpose. If you enable this and make sure you're turned on this snap tracking also, so this will ensure that the cursor is aligned to the path that you want to take. So okay, let us also see in this function. Let us take off this object snap, that is function 11, and look into. So here I can move over the cursor whichever way I want, but if you click on the object snap, then you can make sure. So now I am turned on the object snap, so now you can ensure that the cursor is snapped on to this object. So this is the function of the object snap tracking menu. So as we were discussing, we had looked about the corner point and the extension menu available. So let us look into the more settings there. Yeah, so next option we have is the midpoint. So this is what we were looking at. That is, if we want to plot the center of the circle through the midpoint of both the minimum and maximum dimensions of this object, then we can enable this point. The midpoint specifies the center point of any object, let it be an arc, ellipse, line, or what a spline object also. The computer will compute the midpoint and then give you a snapping track. It denotes to the center of any curvilinear object, that is be an arc, circle, ellipse, or an elliptical arc. Whereas this geometric center represents the geometric center point of a polyline or a 2D polyline and spline. The next command, the node, is useful when you are tracking to a dimension text object or a point object. So with that, you can define the object by nodes and hence track it to those nodes, because these will be hidden. For a text box, this will denote the boundary of the text box. That is typically hidden because you are looking only at the text dimensions into it. So this will help us to position the text box in such a way that the objects are aligned. So next we have the quadrant. So this option will snap to a quadrant point of an arc or an ellipse or an elliptical arc. This intersection is useful when you have an intersecting objects, multiple objects, and you want to find or snap to the exact intersection of those objects. So this is a useful command when you want to execute a drafting command from an intersection point. So next is what you have, the extension. So here it will draw temporary extension line as we had seen, so that you can specify a point outside the object. And next you have the insertion point. So this again snaps to the point where the object, as we had seen earlier, the nodes of a text, it denotes the boundaries, whereas this insertion, it denotes to the point where we had located that object, so that it will snap to that exact insertion point of the previously inserted block or text. And this command is perpendicular to, so when you're drawing any object and want to position it to perpendicular to a secondary object, you can use this command. So next you have a tangent to command. This we had seen last week, where you were using the tangent option, where you can see this icon, so that will list to tangent to the selected object. So in certain case we have also seen the default tangent option that is turned on by default. So this is used to draw a line that is tangent to any arc or circle. So this is a default tangent snap point. Then also we have this command called the nearest point, wherein it will snap to the nearest point that is available to that object. It need not be an end point or a midpoint, but it will look into the shortest point that is available to the existing object. Next, there is this apparent intersection. So it means that this will not be applicable for us in the in the 2D space, but imagine if two objects could be intersecting in the 3D space, but maybe in the current view what we having, that is in this plane of projection, it might not intersect, but it might be intersecting in the other view. So the software computes that apparent intersection and allows you to snap to that point. Then finally we have parallel lines. So this will help you to constrain any object and making sure you stay parallel to that. These are the commands that are available to us for placing quick input setting. So let us enable all and check how we can do this, place the circle within the rectangle. So now we have enabled all the options. Now let us look into the circle again. So now as you could see, here you have multiple commands. So you have here the different nodes, and then you have the midpoint here, and then this command says it's perpendicular to this line, and here you have the end point, and it also shows what is the distance between from the midpoint, and then again snapping to here, and then it also shows the center point here. It is shown by circle here, and then it shows the perpendicular symbol because these two lines are perpendicular to each other, so it shows the perpendicular intersection of this point, and also it shows the extension from the other corner to this point. So these are the different nodes. So this is your nearest point, nearest extension node. Let us go into the command to look into further. See, we were talking about the nearest intersection node. So this is where you get the nearest point. So I can pick this point that is nearest to this. So now, as we said, now this circle center point is being located. So now we are getting the geometric center of this object. So now let us click on this. So it has snapped on to the geometric center. Now for the diameter again, this is what. So I am looking into the midpoint of this, but rather we can also select anything else, but our objective was to snap to this midpoint. So now here we go. So you have got the perfect circle inscribed into this rectangle. So this snap commands is what helped us to do such quick tasks. So let us look into some advanced features. Let us plot a line. So now if I want to draw another line that is perpendicular to this line, this be the starting point. So if you can hover here, you will find a point where it is in the perpendicular location to it. Suppose if we are not able to get the exact nodes, what we can also do is we can press in the control button and right click on. So here you have an extended option to select what is your intended one. So let us select this perpendicular one and see where it gets snapped. So you can see we are now overriding the other options and looking at a point only perpendicular to this object. So this is your perpendicular line. So now this is how you enable a option that is dynamic. So you execute a command, click right with control key button. So now you can see a parallel segment and all. So now as it is overriding this, so it shows that the second line would be parallel to this line. So this is the in drawing menu access of this snapping points. Okay, so coming back to this object snap, so we had a detailed look onto usage of this object snap functionality that will help us to quickly execute the fixation commands that we are looking into. So next let us look into the other snapping command we have called the snap and a grid. So now what we have looked at object snap is snapping to a previously set object, but this was helpful, the snap and grid, wherein we have to snap to a point on the workspace in an incremental step. This hotkey is F9 for enabling this snap on. As you could see, whatever operation we had done earlier is with this snap on turned off. So let us enable the snap on, and then the default spacing is equal spacing of x and y with an increment of 0.5. So let us quickly see how it's going to create. So let us create a line command. So if you could see, the cursor movement is not smooth. Actually, it moves in steps. This is what we had specified with the incremental command. So actually in the x-axis and y-axis, the cursor is moving in incremental steps of 0.5. So let us start this command with line. So let us start with this point, and as you can see, it is going in incremental steps of 0.5 only. So for an understanding, let us draw two lines nearby. And see how the distance fares. So this is in 10.38307 and this is in 11.18. So this again depends on the units that we are specified into. So let us look into that in the second part. But the key takeaway from this snap grid setting is that you are snapping with an incremental x and y. So this snaps goes off when you are out of the drawing command. So now you can see the cursor is moving free, but if you go into any command, that's where your snapping takes place. So now let us go back into this settings menu. So this is the function of the snap, and next we'll specify how it is going to snap, whether it is going to snap in the rectangular manner, that is in x and y, or it is going to snap to an isometric mode. And also we have a polar snap. So let us enable this. So now you can see this is your rectangular coordinates in the grid mode snap. So now when you give in the polar, so it will snap in the polar angle. So based on that, for example, if the snap value is 0, it is for a uniform snap spacing in x. If we specify an alternate unit, say it is 0.25, so your snapping is enabled in that manner. Okay, so this is the function of the snapping object. So typically we will use the grid snap only because we are snapping to the visible grid points in the screen. So this will help better to do our normal task. But if your situation warrants that if you want to do a polar spacing, you can explore that to your requirement and then execute it. So the next step is your grid. So if you can see this, now we have turned off the grid and see it is a plain blank space. So you can enable it back by setting in the F7 button. So when you're enabling back the grid, it will help you to position it much better. But if you want to work in a gridless environment also, you can enable it by turning it on or off. The same settings, the quick settings of this, the D settings is also available on your status bar. So here you can see it's the grid mode and it's the snap mode enabled. So in this drop down menu, you can also select from whether it's a grid snap or polar snap, what we have seen here. So let us go back to this menu, the snap menu, and so here we have the options to where this grid style is located. So where should the grid be displayed? In the 2D model space or in the block editor mode or sheet layout. So we'll look into it in the next stages. But here it is the how far the grid has to be spaced within each other. So you can play with it based on your requirement, based on the scale of the sheet. For example, if you are working on any civil based project that span for kilometers or hectares together, then in order to constrain everything into your domain, you can select your grid accordingly. So this 0.5 might be 0.5 mm or 0.5 meters or 0.5 kilometers, whatever it is, based on the units that you are specifying, your grids get spaced accordingly. So next is you have the behavior of the grid. So right now by default we have always the limit adaptive grids. That is, whenever we are zooming out or into it, the density of the grid is getting adapted. Whereas if you take away, it will remain the same. So the difference is when we are zooming out, it is the spacing is getting adapted. Whereas if we go back and remove this off, you can see the grid has been removed and hence you are working with your overall units that is available to you. And this command is used when you are working out of limits. This also specifies a grid to be displayed outside the working limit that you are working on. And this is a user control system coordinate system that we have discussed earlier. So whenever we are this can be enabled so that the grid always follows the plane that we had selected based on the user. So this is about the snap and grid menu. So now let's look into the next desetting command. So let us open back. So here we had seen snap grid in the previous step. Now let us look into the polar tracking. So this enables tracking mode on with respect to the polar coordinates. So let us turn this on now and see how it increments. So now let us quickly look back into a ellipse. Let us construct an ellipse. We are specifying the center. Now you can see the snapping is respect to the polar coordinates. So look at the angles at which it gets snapped to. So it snaps at 0 degree, 45, 90, 135, 180, 225 and 270. So these are the snapping polar coordinates. So let us look more into this detailed settings. So here you can see the increment angle we can again settle based on what is the angle that we require. So based on the increment angle, it will snap automatically. So our increment angle was 45. So that's why it was snapping to every 45 degrees. So if you specify the increment angle to be 90, now we repeat the same command and you can see that it snaps to only 90 degrees. So there is no 45 degree snapping here and it snaps to the next 90 degree. So by this, based on your requirement, you can enable the polar tracking on by F7 and specify what angle that you need to do. But if you want to specify any custom angle, then you can enter any new angle. So let us say it has to snap at every 132 degree, then so you will have an additional setting that will help you to snap in increments of 132 degree. See, this is where our 132 degree comes in. So this helps you to customize the polar tracking that you want to do. So other options in polar tracking is you can either track the objects along the orthogonal direction. Orthogonal means absolute to 0, 90, 180 and 270. Whereas also we can track using other polar angles. So based on your polar angle settings, it can also track with all the polar setting angles. So this is one option that you can look into. And next, what is the angular measurement? So right now what we are used here, these angles are absolute in nature, but you can also make it relative to the previous angle that has been set in. So this is relative to the last segment. So this is about the polar tracking methodology. And next, let's quickly look into the 3D object snap methodology. So if you are working on a 3D modeling, then these will help you out. It is similar in structure with respect to the 2D object snap, except in 3D option you also have additional facing that you can snap to the edge or to the face of the 3D object or to the edges available, the corner, and with respect to planes you can snap it. So this is available for the 3D object snapping. AutoCAD result shows that once you start working on 3D, and snapping basically computes the distances in the background and extrapolates it for us for quick reference. So this can also slow down the performance. So based on the requirement, you can select which is what. But here in the 2D snap, this computation is pretty fast, so you can enable everything, or if you don't want other snapping to interfere with your work, you can select only which is necessary for you. So next, what we have here is the quick properties. So quick properties helps you to look into the details of that object in a faster manner. So right now by default it is not enabled. So you can enable it by clicking on this icon or Ctrl+Shift+P. So this is available also in your status bar over here. So if you click on this display quick properties and click on OK, you can see that this quick properties icon has been turned on. It's also enabled by the command QP mode. So what does it do exactly? So let us draw a rectangle and maybe draw a circle of arbitrary dimensions. I don't know what it is. So previously when we wanted to investigate, we were using this measure commands. We'll look into the measure commands in detail, but we were predominantly using this to check what its dimensions were. But now as you can see, we had enabled the quick control option by pressing in Ctrl+Shift+P, and now if you click on the object, you will get a opening menu stating what is this object, in which command it has been executed. So this is a circle command, and what is the layer and what is the length. See, if you could recollect, if you hover on the object, you can get the top 3 info of this property in the info tip. But in the quick properties, you have additional input also. It is showing the center point, the location of the center point with respect to the axis, the user coordinate system, and then the radius of it, the diameter, what is the circumference, what is the area. So you get a collated information of that object pretty fast with this method for quick properties toolbar. So when this is heavily used when you are investigating an already existing drawing, you are doing a quantitative analysis onto that drawing, then this is what will help you. So consider it's a complicated object. Say let us draw a polyline. So let us look into this detailed polyline rectangle and polygon towards the end of this session, but let us quickly draw a random image. Consider this is a boundary fence of a playground. So what is this? So this is a polyline and the info pertaining to this. So you can also edit what details you want to look into. So you can see this is for customization menu for this, because we were expecting the area, length and all. So let us enable this for a polyline object. Let us enable the vertex coordinates and then also maybe the line weight that we require, and then click on OK. So now if you click on this, you get the additional detail. So it is show that the vertex point, the overall area, what is the length, and henceforth. So this is the additional data that you can use in through the quick properties toolbar. So by default, AutoCAD does a multi-selection option. So if you click on these three objects, all three will be highlighted and the common properties will be listed. But alternatively, you can still select which do you want. So now the rectangle is also being quoted as a polyline. So and hence that's where it is getting grouped together. So by this you can use the quick properties toolbar to evaluate the properties of that object. So let us go back into the menu and see about the quick properties toolbar. So here this is the collation operation, wherein in the palette whether you have to list all the objects or only the objects with the specified properties. So you can alternate between these two options, and then this command specifies where the palette should be located. So right now by default it's in the cursor dependent one. So where our cursor has been located, based on that it fixes onto the top right quadrant with a distance of 50. So but if you want that to be a static point based on your cursor location, it always stays in a single location. It doesn't vary from object to object. So you can use which is comfortable for you. And next is the palette behavior. So what is the maximum number of rows that it can have? Suppose you have multiple number of rows, and then you can enable this object so that whenever you're defaultly having that palette, it will be in the collapse state with listing only 3 properties. So let us do this. So when clicking on it, you can see the palette is in collapse state, whereas if I hover on it, it will get expanded. So this is a space constraint method. So based on your requirement, you can work on it. So this is about the quick properties toolbar. So now let's look into the dynamic input modes. So in the first week we had seen during the construction of line for polar and coordinate system, relative coordinate systems. So we were using different commands to specify the dimensions or inputting the values on the screen itself. The other way was doing on the command screen. So let us do a graphical inputting. It's called as a dynamic inputs. So to enable that, you can go into the you have to turn on the dynamic input mode. So to do that, you can either do by going to the status mode in customization and enable the dynamic input tool here. So once you enable this, you will get a pop-up here stating the what is the dynamic input mode. So currently it's in off mode. Let us turn it on. So now the dynamic mode has been turned on. So let us remove this object and start afresh. So let us draw a circle. So prompting by C. You can see the dynamic input has prompted here. And now in this dynamic input, there are two information that is available. So once it specifies the user what he should do next. So it is prompting the command prompts first thing, that is the specify center point. So what is the tool expecting out of the user to do at this point? So it is asking to press the center point for this circle. And next you have the dimensions. So for the center point, we have earlier see it is a absolute coordinate or relative, whatever it is, we can specify based on this input. So by pressing on the tab, we can circle among the selection. So this is what the dynamic input is about. So once we have clicked on it, so next input is what is being expected. So it is asking for the radius of the circle. So this is the usage of the dynamic inputs. So you can also see here the other command that is expected. So it is asking specify radius of the circle. We can enter the dimension that is required directly or press enter. So now if we press the dimension and then click on enter, the circle of 45 is drawn. Or if we press on enter directly, it will take in the previous dimension what is already there, the enter or space button. You can see it on this screen here. So if you press on it, it is taking in. So this information is displayed in the dynamic input screen.